What did the Dead Sea Scrolls really reveal? Thousands of years ago, in an ancient land far, far away, there existed a group of people who were so committed to their beliefs that they preserved their scriptures on scrolls made from animal skins. These people were known as the Dead Sea, wait for it, scrolls. Get it? It's because they wrote on those things. Yes, it's a bit silly, but stick with me here because these so-called Dead Sea Scrolls might have some very surprising things to say about humanity's origins. But first, let's rewind the clock back to 1947, when a group of Bedouin goat herders were hanging out by the Dead Sea when they noticed one of their goats chewing on something that looked like a papyrus scroll. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. As it turns out, their goat was enjoying a snack that had been penned by someone 2,000 years earlier. This marked the beginning of the Dead Sea Scrolls saga. Over the next 15 years, more fragments of ancient texts were discovered in the area, leading to the largest ever collection of ancient Jewish texts being found in one place. But what exactly did they find, and why are they so important? Well, that's where you come in. Let's start with a little background. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered at a site called Qumran National Park near the Dead Sea in what is now Jordan, and the scrolls themselves date back to between the last 3 centuries BC and the 1st century CE. That's around the time Jesus was alive, if you're into that sort of thing. The scrolls were found in 11 different caves, but the most famous ones come from Cave 1. Here's how it went down. In 1947, a young man named Muhammad, who was working as a Bedouin goat herder, was hanging out with his buddies when they came across a cave filled with jars. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to check it out. Inside the jars, they found a bunch of leather and papyrus scrolls that were covered in a waxy substance, which is pretty gross if you think about it. They then realized these weren't just random pieces of paper. They were actually copies of some very important religious texts. Some of these texts dated back thousands of years and contained some of the oldest known copies of books from the Old Testament. Word got around quickly about these scrolls, and soon enough archaeologists were on the scene trying to figure out exactly what they had found. It turned out to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The folks who made the scrolls identified themselves as the, you guessed it, Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, that's really what they called themselves. They were a Jewish sect that lived in the middle of the desert and took their religion pretty seriously. They believed they were the only true followers of Judaism and spent their days writing scrolls and their nights fighting off evil spirits. Okay, maybe not that last part. But hold up. Why do we care about all of this? What's so great about finding some old scrolls in a cave? Well, as it turns out, the Dead Sea Scrolls have revealed some pretty interesting stuff about our world. First of all, they gave us a glimpse into the religious beliefs and practices of the people who lived in the Middle East 2,000 years ago. They also helped us understand the historical context of the New Testament and shed light on some of the earliest forms of Christianity. Plus, they just look super cool and mysterious, don't you think? It's hard not to be impressed by the idea of unrolling these ancient texts and reading the words of people who lived so long ago. We can learn a lot from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's also worth taking a moment to appreciate the mystery and wonder they evoke in us. But before we get into what they found, it's important to point out that while these scrolls are pretty old, they're not actually that old. I mean, they're ancient, by our standards, sure, but in the grand scheme of things, they're just a couple thousand years old. In comparison, the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Okay. So what did they actually find in those caves? Well, for starters, they found a whole bunch of scrolls containing books from the Old Testament. Now you might be thinking, big deal, we already know the Old Testament pretty well. But here's the thing, these scrolls contained some of the earliest known copies of the Old Testament. And that means we can compare them to the versions of the Old Testament that we have now to see how they differ. Turns out there are some pretty significant differences, including some passages that are either missing or worded differently than they are in modern translations. For example, the famous passage about Noah's Ark in Genesis is much shorter in the Dead Sea Scrolls version of the Bible. Now, you might be wondering why this is such a big deal. After all, it's just a few verses, right? Well, it turns out that even small differences like this can tell us a lot about the history of the Bible and how it evolved over time. It's like putting together a really old jigsaw puzzle where each piece is a little bit different from what we're used to seeing. And when we put the pieces together, we get a picture of a world that's a little bit different from the one we know. But it's not just the Old Testament that's different in these scrolls. They also contain some pretty interesting stuff that isn't in the Bible at all. For example, they found a document called the Community Manual, which lays out the rules and regulations for the Dead Sea Scrolls community. It's kind of like their version of the Communist Manifesto, if you will. It tells us a lot about how they lived, what they believed in, and how they organized their society. They also found a number of sectarian writings, which are texts that were written by the Dead Sea Scrolls but aren't included in the Bible. These writings often contain information that's not found anywhere else, making them a valuable resource for historians and theologians alike. So why do these guys spend so much time writing stuff that didn't make it into the Bible? Well, it turns out that they were pretty picky about what they included in their holy book. They believed that only certain people were worthy of reading the scriptures, and that most people just couldn't handle it. So they kept their texts secret, hidden away in caves where they wouldn't be found for centuries. But eventually their secret got out, and we ended up with a whole bunch of weird, wacky, wonderful texts that we might not have otherwise ever seen the light of day. It's important to note that these scrolls were discovered over a period of several decades, with the first ones being found in 1947 and the last ones in 1956. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls was a gradual process that involved a lot of searching, excavating, and careful examination. It wasn't just a case of stumbling upon a bunch of scrolls and being done with it. It was a long and meticulous process that required the work of many dedicated individuals. So hats off to those intrepid explorers who braved the harsh conditions of the desert and uncovered these priceless artifacts for us to enjoy today. We should also mention that the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't the only thing that was discovered in those caves. They also found a bunch of other artifacts, such as pottery, lamps, and even some coins. These artifacts provided valuable insights into the daily life of the people who lived in the region during that time period. For example, the pottery helped researchers understand the types of goods that were being produced and traded in the area, while the lamps provided information about how people lit their homes and businesses. The coins shed light on the economic activity taking place in the region. Now it's time to take a detour from the dusty shelves of musty old libraries and head on over to the comments section where we want to hear from you. Here's your question. What's the weirdest thing you've ever read in an old book or scroll? Maybe you were reading a leather-bound copy of Frankenstein when you came across a passage that made your skin crawl, or perhaps you were examining a brittle scroll in an ancient Egyptian tomb when you stumbled upon a curse that would make your hair stand on end. Whatever it is, we want to hear about it. So please share your thoughts below, and let's see if we can find some common ground. But before you do that, we want to remind you to follow us for more fun and engaging videos. You never know what kind of crazy discoveries we might uncover next. Who knows? Maybe we'll stumble upon some lost Dead Sea Scrolls that will change everything we know about human history. Just kidding, kind of. Anyway, thanks for watching HistoroMystic, and we'll see you in the next one.